Welcome to the Libertarian Counterpoint. I'm Richard Fields. On the program today, we have investment advisor Philip Larrea, Tyler Kuski from the El Dorado Libertarian Party. Welcome to the show. As far as the El Dorado Libertarian Party, you got something going on coming up here, right?
Yep, tomorrow actually. We are going to be hosting a mixer up in Ella Hills. It's going to be at Steve's Pizza. Pizza's on us, but you'll have to buy your own beer. So, but we're going to have some speakers come out. We're going to have somebody from the Jefferson movement come out and give a little speech. We're going to have somebody from Voters Who Engage, which is an organization trying to allow petitioning to become digitalized. And then we're also going to be having somebody from the Gary Johnson campaign speak a little bit about that, actually. So it's going to be from 6 to 9 in LA Hills.
This is Friday the 26th?
Yep.
Friday the 26th, El Dorado Hills, Steve's Pizza. Be there or be square.
Yep.
Okay. The issue that has really got my attention, or one of the financial issues that's gotten my attention, is the fact that with a zero interest rate environment, it's really getting difficult for pension funds to earn enough money to meet their obligations. I mean, they were having problems before we went to 0% interest. Now, is there any hope at all that most public and private pension funds will be able to actually survive?
Well, we're not without reform.
Not with what?
Not without reform. Arizona just enacted some really positive reform. But when we look at the numbers, especially from the investment community, and we're trying to figure out what that next black swan, what that fat tail event, whatever you want to call them, that will really take the market down, similar to the mortgage crisis, it looks like pensions. You see a rolling, it's not generally understood that $6 trillion worth of the Wall Street investment is public union pension funds, the largest segment, 22%. So if the market
You're talking about 22% of the stocks and bonds?
Total.
Is pension.
Of a total value of U.S. markets of about $27 trillion. $6 trillion of it is U.S. public pensions.
Wow.
Yeah.
Public and private, or just public?
Just public. Add in private and you get up to 33%, another half. Okay,
so a third of the stock and bond market value. Does that include real estate too, or just stocks and bonds?
CalPERS does things they call alternative investments, but
So
yeah,
you're really
talking about
talking-
REITs, real estate investment trusts.
Yeah.
But in the stock market itself.
But you're essentially the percentages you're talking about are of the capital markets, meaning stocks and bond markets.
Correct.
Okay.
So when you talk about something like that, you've got a real social problem in that government has to be committed to the market going up. And once you have that happen, you have all kinds of mispricings, and somebody looks under the hood and says, oh my goodness, this municipal bond is going to fail. So anybody that saw The Big Short, the movie, there are people out there looking at municipal bond for Chicago, looking at California, which has not got a prayer. It's had a zero rate of return for the last 2 years.
You're talking about CalPERS.
CalPERS. When that happens and you are paying out as if you were making 7.5% a year, anybody that's was ever taking a distribution in a bear market can tell you just how quickly your 401k can go down. And it's almost impossible to recover because even when the market recovers, you just don't have enough left to go up. So we've got a problem now where you've got capital flight going out of California. 10,000 businesses left California after after the financial crisis, which means there just aren't as many taxpayers as there were. We are about a 1-to-1 ratio between retired public employees and active public employees.
1-to-1.
Almost 1.1 to 1 now. It's supposed to be 2-to-1, which means, of course...
Is this because of early retirement deals, that sort of thing, or is it just are people getting tired of working for the man, or what?
A lot of it was the early retirement, great benefits. But the other part of it is that the budgets hit the crisis where they were not able to hire. So they didn't have the budget to take on the people that they need to contribute to the pension to fund those who are already in retirement. So we have a system going
So the legs are going out from under the pyramid scheme.
Absolutely. And what are the alternatives other than cutting the benefits are to raise taxes. And California, we have a number of initiatives this November, and for whatever purpose they say they're going for the pensions. California alone is about $1 trillion underfunded after these last 2 years. So there are ways to reform it, and Arizona was a great example of the public union employees themselves voting overwhelmingly, 70%, police officers and firefighters, for the reform that involved essentially treating it in many ways like Social Security and a 401k, reducing the cost of living adjustment, capping it at $110,000 rather than these people like Katehi or Dirks most recently in Berkeley. These people with $600,000 salaries and a percentage of that for life. So they've adopted all kinds of things that are great for the public employees, but over a long period of time changed the trajectory significantly. And that's where we are now. Until the public union people get on board, California's in deep trouble.
How does it play out if the unions say, you owe it to us, figure out how, raise taxes, do whatever you need to do, pay us?
Detroit.
In other words,
You lose the
state bankruptcy?
We are losing the tax base now. Even the retired public employees are leaving the state. They're all going to Oregon and Nevada. So they're collecting the California money and spending it in Nevada and Oregon.
And not paying taxes in California as a result.
So it's just, the most basic law of economics is incentives and disincentives. When you create a disincentive to be in a place or to earn money or to do, if you're going to have to pay half of your money in taxes, it's a significant disincentive.
Well, to the larger question, which is not just a California problem. I mean, California is, along with Illinois, is probably the worst of a bad lot of the way pensions are managed. But $6 trillion is the number that I've heard nationwide for the funding gap. If you're looking at a $6 trillion $6 trillion gap in funding, and you're looking at 0% interest rate, and most pension funds have a significant portion of their investment going, or traditionally have had a significant portion of their investment going into bonds rather than stocks because of the lower risk.
That has not been true, actually.
Not?
No, because 7.5% is the assumed rate of return that they use right now to give for distribution. There was never a time, that's down from 8.5%.
Yeah.
There was never a time when the assumption was like Social Security, where you were going to put it in long-term treasuries, which ironically would have returned that money for you. But it has always been, the pension funds have always been aggressive asset managers. And one of the problems that happened with CalPERS in particular, the former CEO was convicted and ultimately committed suicide for a pay-to-play operation, and he was being bribed to hire expensive fund managers to manage what is close to $400 billion worth of assets. So this was never kind of a no-brainer. CalPERS just came out this week and said that their hedge funds were their worst performers.
They're hiring hedge funds, 20 and 20?
They are, that's a big part of their portfolio, as well as what they call alternative investments. Buying properties, and they are out there on the scale of risk and always have been.
There was a time back in the 90s when CalPERS had a good reputation for their investment prowess. Was there
no
not?
More. They are, the fact that they produce zero wasn't that the market didn't produce a lot, but to produce zero.
Well, when you're paying 20% up front, and then or 20% of profits plus 2%, 2 and 20, 2% of the assets and 20% of the profits. Is that the deal that they're getting from the hedge funds? Or
that has been, and we saw many people might have seen. It's been out there, but John Oliver recently did a thing on the 401k, as did Frontline before that, where even a 2% reduction in your rate of return because of fees actually causes you to lose about 2/3 over a period of 40 years of your total return.
Yeah.
That sounds counterintuitive.
No, not at all. Not when you figure that's 2% every year.
And certainly pensions and Social Security and those kinds of instruments are geared towards 40 and 50-year rates of return.
Okay, so traditionally, what has been the mix between stocks and bonds? If it's not heavily weighted toward bonds, what has it been in pension funds in California and elsewhere?
The best judgment of the Wizards of Wall Street. Where are we going? What looks to be, is real estate going to be hot? Should we be buying REITs? Should we be looking at international small caps? Where is the best rate of return? And there's a mix. To be sure, CalPERS owns a fair amount of property in Sacramento, for instance. But there was never the idea that with that rate of return, which was the historical rate of return of the S&P 500, there was never the assumption that they were going to be in ultra-safe bonds. And
they were, in other words, it was almost all stock from the get.
What we would consider a reasonable portfolio, 70-30 stocks, bonds, 50-50, 60-40.
Well, which explains why the stock market continues to go up in spite of the fact that earnings are going down.
Exactly. And this is the larger problem, that when you have the Federal Reserve and the federal government and state governments committed to the market going up to meet their social obligations, now you've got all kinds of problems. This was what happened with the mortgage market. It was a feeling of a social obligation to give lower middle class people a leg up, get them in the house as long as they can make the payment.
But this is not helping the lower middle class. This is helping only the people who either have pensions or who have lots of assets to invest. It's helping the 1% to coin the phrase.
And then tears. When I shudder to think what 65, 70-year-old was told they were going to get $50,000 a year, and as almost happened in Stockton, they were told that was going to get cut in half. Well, on this path, that will happen. And so without the reform ahead of that curve, and this is where I'll be optimistic and say, once people begin to understand that there are no firefighters because there's no budget for them, it all went to the retirees, there are no police, and this is happening. We are crowding out services. And once people feel the bite of all those services being crowded out, and the option
if they miss them at all.
If you get them at all.
If they miss them.
Well, perhaps. But that's what Arizona found, and that's why the police and firefighters supported overwhelmingly the reform.
If you take a flawed financial system and a flawed social justice system, which is kind of what we're looking at, the idea that you can promise more to retirees than you're taking in taxes and so forth. Don't you end up going the way of Venezuela eventually?
Absolutely. And the thing that happened with Venezuela particularly is they tied all of their social programs to a commodity, as did Saudi Arabia.
Well, that's part of the problem. They tied everything to oil, but that's only part of the problem. The other part of the problem is they nationalized everything. They got rid of all of the people, the companies, the Shells and the Exxons and so forth, that actually knew how to drill for oil and tried to do it themselves, not with a whole lot of good result. So their reserves started going down. They had massive redistribution of income from the oil industry to the general populace. And now, once the price of oil went down, and the fact that everybody was dependent upon the oil industry because everything else in the country was starved out of capital investment, they are now facing rampant inflation and food shortages and riots in the streets.
Well, and they talk about food shortages, they're literally eating the pigeons and the zoo animals. It is very desperate. And the same thing happened with Zimbabwe to some degree, but with Venezuela in particular, everything depended on $100 a barrel oil. And they are not in a position, much like most of South America, Brazil and Argentina. Brazil is right behind them. They don't have the clout in the global market to go out and print money. They can do it, but nobody is going to pay up for it. So when the Europeans do it, when the U.S. does it, when the UK does it, everyone says, well, when the Japanese do it, everyone says, well, this is the world we live in, we'll balance it all out. But when it's a country like Venezuela or Argentina or Brazil, yes, they can print money, but nobody wants it. And so they can't go to capital markets.
Actually, I was in Venezuela where I saw a picture floating on the internet where somebody was holding an empanada. There was a shortage of napkins, and so they used their money to hold an empanada because there was no napkins, and napkins were more expensive than the money itself. It was just cheaper to use a couple dollar bills you had in your back pocket than an actual napkin.
Yeah, and of course it's a huge black market. You can go shopping in Venezuela once a week with $1 and buy all the groceries you can find, which is to say none.
And there's a massive emigration from Venezuela to Colombia and other neighboring countries.
And it's such a shame. It's a beautiful country.
And it's the richest.
All of the natural resources.
Was the richest country in South America at one time.
Yeah.
So it was entirely due to two things: the price of oil, which is a problem, but it's primarily due to the socialist economics introduced by Chavez
and we know that because Brazil is in the same place. And while Brazil certainly has great resources with oil, there was a country you cannot imagine why it's not the richest country on earth. You know, incredible ability to produce food, an incredible tourist attraction, oil. There is nothing that country lacks. Greater resources than the U.S. And yet, in the last 7-8 years, I mean, they are just this far from Venezuela at this point. It's been very hard for them to hold it together for the Olympics.
Hence, having to use patrolmen with rubber bullets to clear the way for the parade with the torch for the Olympics. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's, you know, the people in Venezuela or in Brazil not real happy that the government's spending all that money on the games when people are, I guess, starving in the street.
And there's nobody to produce. It's that same problem that when there's no incentive to produce, people don't produce and say somebody's going to give me what I need, and somehow it's happening magically out there. And then there comes a day when you go to the gas station and there's no gas in the pump. You know, there's no bread on the shelf. And, you know, we've seen a little of that back in the 70s and that kind of thing with the whole Nixon business of price fixing on gasoline. So it's not a myth.
Yeah, wage and price controls under the Nixon administration, along with taking us off the gold standard. Didn't work out so very well.
No. You know, the makers say, gosh, I'm losing too much.
Yeah.
The takers say, well, you know, let's hope it keeps going.
Well, in the U.S., at least, we have a Constitution to rely on, I think. But there was a problem with the Constitution in that evidently a police officer in Glen Ellyn, Illinois, couldn't figure out exactly what a Constitution was. A couple of students at the College of DuPage were out distributing pocket constitutions on campus, on the street, and were threatened with being jailed for not having a permit to do whatever, a permit to distribute those pocket constitutions. Any thoughts on that?
Well, you can't be distributing paraphernalia. Come on.
Paraphernalia, yeah, okay. Right.
Well, that's the way the government views it. I mean, as far as I'm concerned.
Subversive document. I think the Declaration was in there as well, which guarantees the right to alter and abolish a government that is not working properly.
So here's what I think is actually coming from the cops, and is I think they view it as a public display. If you're because I got detained last 4th of July for waving an American flag.
What?
Yeah. They calmed off, and I talked the ear off, and eventually let me go. But eventually they like questioned me and my friends for walking out of an American flag, which apparently is you need a permit to do that.
A permit to carry an American flag where, on the street? What?
Well, because you're doing a public display, you're doing a march.
You're having a parade without a permit.
Yeah, by yourself. You and your two friends or whatever. So these guys were together, so therefore they needed a permit. I think that's what it is the cop views it this way. It's very binary. It's like, well, you don't have a permit to pass out this Constitution. You're doing a public display. And so that's probably what the cop is thinking when he's trying to. Did he end up arresting these guys? Or
no, they ended up, I think, complying and going to the school permit office and or just saying to heck with it. Yeah,
exactly. So I mean, the cops they're just probably bored, looking for somebody who's not complying with some kind of regulation and stuff. And that's all it is. I bet you if he went out by himself, they may have given him less trouble and stuff, because you're by yourself distributing might be a little bit less troublesome. But the fact that you're together, it looks very formal. And anytime anything is formal without a permit, it looks illegal to cops.
Interesting. A Ninth Circuit three-judge panel has ruled that the federal government cannot prosecute medical marijuana suppliers in California. Reason for it is because of Section 542 of last year's omnibus spending bill, federal omnibus spending bill. There was an amendment introduced by Congressman Dana Rorabacher of California, which said that the government was prohibited, or the DEA was prohibited, from spending any money on marijuana law enforcement action when the state law in the state involved allowed said activity. Philip, is this a it's kind of technical, but is it a bright light in the
Well,
a good sign, a good omen?
Well, what it shows is that we really, really, to Tyler's point, is that the rule of law just doesn't exist anymore. People are winging it because federal law must always supersede state law. That's why there's supposed to be very few of them. It was limited to treason and counterfeiting and those sorts of things. But the federal government is required to enforce the laws that it does have. States cannot pass a law that is counter to federal law.
Which, of course, all of the marijuana laws in Colorado and California and Oregon and elsewhere, Washington, all do that.
So right away, we're at a constitutional impasse, and we're just choosing to look the other way. However, the other issue is that where federal law does apply, the federal government must enforce. The state government need not. So the Constitution gives states policing power, but it gives them discretion over how they will enforce their laws.
And they don't have to enforce federal laws.
They do have, the state does not enforce federal
Exactly.
laws. Obviously it'll help, but the federal government is required to.
Yeah, but the state is not
So it
required
cannot
to.
pass its own law saying
Yeah.
that I will not enforce my own law.
And that's what happened.
And that's exactly what happened.
They passed a law, well, they passed a law saying there was no funding for it.
Well, I mean, that's a kind of a trick if you really want to decriminalize something, is just get rid of the funding for it.
Well, it's been tried by, I think, a number of different executives have said, we're not going to spend money on doing whatever it is that the executive branch doesn't want to spend money on. I mean, you can think of immigration law, you can think of, in this case, drug law, you can think of any number of different things that have been selectively not prosecuted by administrations that don't like the underlying law.
Well, and the Congress did the same with No Child Left Behind in the Bush years. The law was out there, but there was no money. It was never budgeted.
Yeah. So, well, I guess from a libertarian standpoint, we just have way too many laws, particularly at the federal level. But it's not just the federal level, it's also state and local.
Well, and the idea was with the federal government constitutionally was that there would be very, very few laws, and they would be related to insurrection, to treason, to counterfeiting, that they would be of such a serious nature. I believe those were the only three. And that ultimately they added kidnapping across state lines, I think was the fourth. And now we have, I believe it is, over 3,000 federal laws. Well,
just California alone, last year passed almost 1,000 laws, just in California alone.
Yeah.
And that's just and that's a year. So I mean, times that however many years and stuff, you're talking thousands and thousands, if not millions of laws.
Well, one good law that's been introduced, hasn't been passed yet, but introduced, is one by Democratic Assemblywoman Patty Lopez, has introduced a bill making withholding evidence by prosecutors a felony with a possible 16 months penalty. Right now it's a misdemeanor. So in other words, prosecutors are required to give defense attorneys any evidence that they have, whether it's exculpatory or not. And a lot of prosecutors say, no, we're not going to help out the other side, and have been able to basically skate on that. This law would level the playing field in criminal law, would it not?
Well, there's kind of an interesting point. I think it already is a law. It's a question of prosecuting the prosecutors.
Yeah, whether it's a felony versus misdemeanor.
Yeah. And so it's there are cases now of people who have been wrongfully imprisoned for many, many years, where the prosecutor knew that the defendant was innocent. They had evidence to that effect,
And refuse, yeah, exactly.
as say exculpatory evidence, which I believe you are required still to produce.
Yeah.
The problem now, here's the interesting thing, is if anyone stands the prospect of prosecution, will they go into the business at all? And so that's one of those unintended consequences. If I'm an attorney and I'm a prosecuting attorney for a state, is that my chance to say, my gosh, I could be imprisoned? I could.
I don't think that's really a discouragement, really. I mean,
if you do what you're supposed to do, which share all the evidence, good, bad, or indifferent, then you're not. There's no risk.
Well, it's a little bit like the CEOs.
And maybe if it's stopping someone from entering that or becoming a prosecutor, it's a good thing, because then you're weeding out dishonest people. I mean, we want. If you're honest, you have nothing to worry about.
Or politically ambitious people who are trying to, be the next Rudy Giuliani.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in general, I think it's great if there's any kind of balance between the full weight of the state against a defendant who is usually resourceless, because chances are they have also frozen his assets, if he has any. And so anything, when you have the full power of the state prosecuting, but you have a defenseless person at the other end of it, there's a reason that 95% of all inmates today are in jail without a trial.
We have a couple minutes left, and there's just one juicy topic I would like to get to, and that's the hacking of George Soros and his various foundations and so forth. The top three things that were revealed by the hacked emails of George Soros is that he gave money to manipulate the media in Ukraine in support of coup there. He gave $650,000 to Black Lives Matter, trying to stir up trouble in the U.S. And he is, as we speak, or very recently, trying to capitalize with creating trouble in Europe due to the European refugee crisis. George Soros he's a piece of work. That's the show. We'll see you again next week, same time, same place, on the Libertarian Counterpoint, on television, Channel 17 Sacramento, on YouTube, on the internet at accesssacramento.org at 8 p.m. Thursday, noon Friday, and 4 a.m. Saturday. And remember, tomorrow, the 26th, depending on when you're watching this, the 26th of August, fun and games at Steve's Pizza in El Dorado.